Hello, stamping friends. Welcome to the first video of Learning with Friends. Normally you would see Connect to Create at this time, and if you missed the announcement last Thursday, you can go back and take a look or listen and figure out what's going on with that. But I'm starting a new series called Learning with Friends, and it'll be similar to what we did before. I'll show you a technique, and then I'll show you a card or two or three or four that I made with that particular technique. I'm not going to necessarily show you the complete card making process for the whole card, but the intent here is to show you the techniques so you can learn some new techniques. And I'm planning to do this each week. So I'm calling these videos Learning with Friends. And I guess you could say this is the premiere. This is my very first one. And today I'm doing a technique that I just recently discovered. I actually discovered it out on Split Coat Stampers, and it's called Debossed Inky Resist. And it's similar to some of the ink resist techniques that are out there, but it's got a few twists. So I'm going to go ahead and let's get started. I'll flip to the other camera and let's have some inky fun. Okay, so the first thing, let me run through a list of the supplies that you'll need for this particular Debossed Inky Resist technique. Obviously, you need an embossing folder, and it uses watercolor paper, which I had never done an embossed resist with watercolor before, so that's one little twist. Because we're also going to do heat embossing, we need some Versamark. And then either white or clear embossing powder works fine. I'm going to use white today, but you can use either, whichever you have. And of course, since we're doing heat embossing, we need a heat tool. And then we will need to add our color, some water-based inks, and you can use either an ink pad or your Stampin' Write markers work great. The Stampin' Blends will not work. They're alcohol-based, remember. So you do need water-based ink, and a silicone mat or craft sheet, whatever you have, and a water spritzer. So these are the list of things you need. And let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with my embossing folder, and the card I'm going to show you today, I used the 3D Fern embossing folder. If you're not familiar with this is a gorgeous embossing folder. It's been around for, I don't know, this is at least the second year. It might even be going into the third. It's been around for a bit, but I love it. It's just so pretty once you emboss your cardstock, whether you're using this technique or you're just embossing. But the first thing we're going to do is apply Versamark to the debossed side of the folder. Now, on these 3D folders, it can be kind of difficult to actually figure out which one is the debossed side, but a little trick, Stampin' Up! Embossing folders, the debossed side always seems to be the front, the side with the logo. So that's where we're going to apply our Versamark ink, and I'm just going to tap it on here. You need an area large enough, obviously, to cover your watermark or your watercolor paper. But I'm just going to do the whole thing. You want to get it well covered, so just tap multiple times till you think you have it well covered. And all that's getting raised, or all that's getting inked, are the raised surfaces. And those are what will press into the paper, so that's why we call them debossed. Now, one thing you want to be careful of, you don't want to let this slide around on there. So what I have found is what works best for me is I just lay my watercolor paper on the opposite side, and then I close my folder. And that way you don't have to worry about it sliding around. Now we need our Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. This barely fits in my little area here. Let me see how much of that you can see. All right, since this is a 3D folder, We need to use plate number 1, or the base, which is plate number 1. We are using this 3D embossing folder directions down here, and then we use plate number 4. So we're just going to make a sandwich. Now always remember, put your hinged end through first. That just is better for your embossing folders so you don't crack them. And we're going to run it through. And then I'm done with this Stampin' Cut and Emboss. Let's just get it out of our way. And again, as you take it out of the folder, just be careful you don't slide it around on the side with the ink, and you're going to pick that out. Now, like I said, the areas that are pressed down in are the areas that have Versamark on them. And what we want to do is we're going to heat emboss that with, I'm using white. You can use clear. It doesn't really matter. So just pour a generous layer of embossing powder on here. I'm going to empty my thing. I've only got about a half of one left, but there'll still be plenty once I dump it off. So you're just going to take this and kind of move it around a little bit, just kind of like you're dusting a cake pan with flour, and then tap it off. And you're going to give it a couple snaps on the back to tap it off. The purpose of the embossing powder is so that when we go to apply ink, the ink will only adhere to those areas that don't have the embossing powder on it. I think I got a little fleck of dirt or something there. Okay. So we're going to heat this with our heat tool. This is going to be a little bit loud. I'm only going to do portion of this just because this is watercolor paper. So it's thicker and heavier, and it takes a little bit longer on there to heat up the powder for it to melt. But I'll do a portion of it. You can see when it starts to turn, it'll start to turn white or shiny. And like I said, it's going to take a minute because it is heavier paper. It's why I like to do it in my little old cake pan here, because I get a little bit of heat advantage coming from the back side as the pan moves and heats up as well. Let me just pick this up and see if you can see it changing. You see it turning clear or white? I think so. Maybe not on the video. I can see it. But we're going to do that with this whole piece of cardstock. Okay, so we repeat the whole thing and emboss the whole thing. And that would take probably 2 or 3 minutes, but you get the idea, I think. If I flip this around, maybe you can see the shine. I'm not sure. Sometimes it's really hard to see white on white, but you would emboss this complete piece of watercolor paper. And then on the magic of television, I have one that's completed. So this one, the whole thing, you can see the background is shiny. And now comes the fun stuff. And I will be honest, it is a little bit messy. Messy has never stopped me as long as my outcome is worth the mess. And I'm using a silicone mat because I'm going to lay some ink on here. And you can do this one of 2 ways. You can just take your ink pad and apply it directly to the mat. You can also use Stampin' Write markers and scribble on it with your brush end. I'm just going to use my pad, and we're going to lay down some colors. Now I want to make sure that I get an area that's at least bigger than my paper. So I'm going to randomly add some different colors of green, okay? This is Old Olive. And the next color I'm using is Shaded Spruce. And again, I'll try to tap this where there isn't any ink. If you overlap it a little bit, it don't worry about it. You just have to be a little careful that you don't overlap them all, because you'll just end up with a green blob. So you do want to keep some separation of the colors. And the other color I'm going to use is Pretty Peacock. It's kind of a green. It's got some blue in it. Love this color. I'm so glad they brought this one back this year. This is one of the returning colors. And if you don't get the whole thing covered, don't worry about it, because we are going to spritz this now with water. Let me just get a little bit more down here. And you can either just tap this or you can wipe it, whatever works best. Doesn't look like much right now, does it? And now I'm going to take my Stampin' Spritzer and I am going to spritz it lightly with water. I'll hold it maybe about 6 inches away. I do have a plastic mat back here in the background. There's some embossing powder on there, but you don't need it super wet, but you want it wet enough so it's going to soak into your watercolor paper that you emboss. And I'm just going to take this now. This is my embossed piece, my heat embossed and my dry embossed. And I'm going to lay it face down with the embossed side down. And I'm just going to kind of press that into the water. Or I should say really into the ink, right? And just rub it back and forth a bit. Every one of these is going to turn out different. And it's always a surprise when you lift it up and look at it. You want to just hold it there for maybe, I don't know, I'd say 5 to 10 seconds at least. So it has time to absorb into the watercolor paper. And look what you get. Is that not so pretty? I'm just going to set this silicone mat aside. And you can either let this dry. It will not absorb into the areas where there's embossing. And you can kind of see how it's puddled up. I have a paper towel here that I am just going to kind of take off some of the excess. And let me lift this up. Now, if I have a spot that maybe I missed or I want it a little darker, you can always dip it in there again. Like I have maybe up in this area, this corner up here along this edge, I maybe didn't get any ink. So I can just go back. And here's where you do have to be a little careful. I'm just going to press that area in along the edge and get some ink up there. And then I'll blot it again. The reason you want to be careful, if you just start taking this and you blot it around in different areas, you're just going to get mud. It's going to look, like muddy green because you won't get the distinction of the colors. But I think you certainly can see the old olive in here, the Pretty Peacock and the shaded spruce is the darker colors. But doesn't that just make those ferns just pop? I thought that was such a pretty technique. And look how easy it was. What did it take us? Maybe 3-4 minutes at most. The hardest part's picking your colors when you're making it. So now let me show you the card that I made with this. I am going to flip this over, get rid of the wet spot. And here's the card I made. I used the Hello Ladybug stamp set, and it's coordinating Ladybug Builder die. I'm calling this one my Glamorous Ladybug. And I embossed her also with gold and silver embossing powder. I was on an embossing roll, I guess. So it's a pretty birthday card for somebody. Pretty much generic, could work for a guy or a gal, I think. And I kept the inside simple. I just added a a simple birthday sentiment. So that's my first card. This card will be posted on my blog tomorrow. There will be a free written tutorial available with all the dimensions for the cutting. You might have figured out I made my technique sheet just about a ½ inch wider than my finished one, because on this card I didn't have anything left over to decorate it with. And so if you think about it ahead of time a little bit while you're making your sheet, just make it a little bit wider, and then you can trim off a piece, trim it to whatever size you want for the front, and use your scraps to decorate the inside. I didn't think ahead when I did it. So that's my first card. Now, I got a little bit carried away. I was having so much fun. This is my first time I ever used this technique, so I wanted to try it with a lot of different kinds of embossing folders. This one is the Painted Posies, and it's certainly a very different embossing folder than the Fern. The Fern's kind of an all over pattern one, but the technique was the same. And the colors I used on this card were Berry Burst, Moody Mauve, Azure Afternoon, which is kind of the blue you see up here, Coastal Cabana, and Granny Apple Green. And this one, when I wiped it off, I didn't wipe it totally clean, so there is some color that adhered to my embossed surface. And I just left that on there and let that dry to just sort of give it a little bit of tint or a hint of color. I wanted to keep it, again, so the background was what you mainly focused on. So I used this Glimmer Organdy ribbon, which is still available. I believe it's an online exclusive. This is the tag dies. I think they're called designer tag dies. And I thought they had retired, but I went online and looked, and they are also available as an online exclusive. And this little butterfly out of some soft glimmer paper, Berry Burst glimmer paper, is from the same tag dies. And then for the envelope here, I just embossed it with the same embossing folder. So that's my second card. I played with I think it's called Elegant Eucalyptus. Is that what the name of it? I think it's Elegant Eucalyptus. It's something eucalyptus. And because here's a design that basically looks like a spray of flowers or a spray of leaves. So I wanted to see how that turned out. So I played with that one too. Just took a bird from Perched in a Tree and colored him with my Stampin' Blends. Made a little parakeet. I looked up what parakeet colors are on Google, and I found one that color, and I thought it looked kind of pretty. So that was my other card, my third card. And I did say I got a little bit carried away. Oh, the colors on this card, I could tell you, are Shaded Spruce. This is what I used for the dipping. Shaded Spruce, Granny Apple Green, Mossy Meadow, Old Olive, Parakeet Party, Gorgeous Grape, and Orchid Oasis. And for this particular card, I did use Stampin' Write markers to scribble on my craft sheet. So the nice thing about the Stampin' Write markers is you can color smaller areas than if you have your big pad. So you can kind of use more colors. So that was my try. I wanted to see if the markers worked, and they did. They worked just fine. Okay, and then the last card, I used the Quatrefoil embossing folder. This is a 2D embossing folder. All the others are 3D. And I wanted to see what it looked like with a 2D embossing folder. And I thought that turned out really pretty too. This is with the, what's it called? Earth and Textures stamp set and dies that I used to make my little pot of flowers here, pot of leaves. But the colors on the back of that one, oh, what are the colors? Got them written down somewhere. Pecan Pie, Pretty Peacock, and Calypso Coral. Those were the 3 colors I used for this background. So hopefully you can see that. They're pretty. So I got a little bit carried away, did a little more number of cards than usual because I had so many different things I wanted to try with this technique. And like I said, it was my first time using it. So let's go ahead and flip the camera back. I hope you like those cards. Do I have them maybe squishing down just a bit so I can get them all in there? Okay, and the first one I showed you will be on my blog tomorrow with a complete written tutorial. So I hope you'll go visit my blog, Fairless Stampin Flair. The address and link will be in below the video. And I am trying to get back to myself. There I am. Okay. Someday I'll have this figured out and it'll be automatic and I won't even have to think about it. But that day isn't here yet. You'd think it'd be here by now, but maybe I just have to do more than one a week. Or it used to be one every 2 weeks when we were doing Connect to Create. So hopefully I'll get better. But I hope you like those cards. I hope you'll go to my blog and check out the tutorial. I also wrote out the instructions on the tutorial, so you can download that. And then you'll have the video to refer to if you have questions. I know we all learn a little differently. Some of us learn better by reading and doing. Some of us learn better by watching and doing. And some of us, sometimes it's helpful to have both. So I hope you liked it. If you did, will you give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel? I'd love to have you come back. I'll be doing this once a week. And if you have any requests or suggestions of techniques that you've seen that you would like to have demonstrated, let me know and I'll do my best to figure them out and share them with you. So have a great day. Thanks for watching and we will see you next week.